snow clawed at the windshield like it was trying to get in. Ben Holloway squinted through the blur of sleet and pine needles, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The narrow mountain road curled like a dying serpent through the woods, the truck's headlights slicing through fog thick enough to choke on. On either side, trees leaned close, their limbs bare and spidery, casting shadows that seemed to breathe. In the passenger seat, Ellie stared out the window, silent, 10 years old, pale. Her breath fogged the glass, but she didn't wipe it away. She hadn't spoken since Denver, not since Anna, not since the sirens, the funeral, the silence that came after and never left. Ben glanced at her, heart aching. Her tiny fingers gripped the stuffed rabbit she hadn't let go of in 3 months. The fur was matted, one eye missing, and the seams at the neck were coming loose, just like everything else. He cleared his throat, trying to sound lighter than he felt. "This is it, kiddo," he said. "Cabin's just ahead. $5 and a signature. Hell of a deal, right?" No answer, not even a blink. He turned back to the road. A gust of wind slammed into the truck. The tires skidded, just a second, but his chest clenched like it was the edge of a cliff. The truck groaned, corrected, rolled forward. The silence between him and Ellie pressed like a third body in the cab. "You don't fix grief by running from it, Ben." Anna's voice echoed in his head, bitter and soft, like it always did when the dark got close. He'd ignored her then, swallowed his pain like he did whiskey. Too fast, too often. She wanted therapy. He wanted distance. Now she was gone, and all he had left was a little girl who wouldn't speak, and a cabin in the woods he'd bought sight unseen. The cabin came into view like something unearthed from a forgotten time, a lopsided shape squatting beneath snow-draped pines, the shingles curling at the corners like peeling bark. The porch sagged. One shutter hung sideways. Smoke hadn't touched the chimney in years. Ben pulled the truck to a stop, turned off the engine. The silence that followed was alive. Ellie opened her door and stepped into the snow without a word. He followed. Cold slapped his face. The air smelled of pine, ash, and old stone. Beneath the snow, something felt wrong. Not dangerous, just heavy, like the cabin had been waiting for them. Ben unlocked the front door with an old key that turned too easily. The hinges shrieked. Inside, dust hung in beams of weak light. The air was thick with damp wood, rust, and mildew. A couch sagged in the corner. A cold iron stove sat at the room's center like a relic from a war. Cabinets hung crooked. The windows hadn't been cleaned in a decade, but it was theirs. "Home, sweet home," he muttered. Ellie didn't look at him. She drifted to a frosted window and started drawing invisible lines with her finger, eyes far away. He set their bags down and crouched by the stove, checking the flue. The metal creaked under his touch, brittle with age. He lit a match, tested the draft. Smoke rose steady, one step at a time. They unpacked in silence. Ben laid out a couple of sleeping bags near the stove. Ellie settled in, rabbit tucked under her chin, eyes blank. He watched her. So small, so lost. He wanted to reach her, but every word felt like it would shatter. He looked around at the cabin. It needed everything: work, insulation, repairs. He could handle that. He'd built his life with his hands before. He could do it again. What he didn't know how to fix was her. Later, after they'd eaten a can of soup warmed over the stove, the wind picked up outside. The trees groaned like they remembered being taller. Ellie lay wrapped in blankets, her rabbit cradled close, while Ben sat on the edge of the couch, flipping through the cabin's old ledger. Just old repairs, faded ink. Nothing strange. Until Ellie whispered, barely audible, "Dad." Ben looked up sharply. "What, honey?" She pointed toward the far side of the room. Near the back wall, just behind the rug, muddy streaks stained the wood. fresh, thin, irregular. He stood and walked over slowly, crouching. The prints were faint, but there, paw prints, big and wrong. One track deeper than the others, like the animal limped. He peeled back the rug. More prints, leading straight toward a seam between two floorboards. "You see this?" he asked, more to himself. Ellie nodded. Ben pressed his ear to the floor. At first, silence. Then, something faint. A slow, scraping drag. Not wind. Not mice. Claws. His pulse ticked upward. He reached for the fireplace poker and tapped the wood gently. The scraping stopped. He held his breath. Then it came again, slower this time, like whatever was down there had heard him too. Ellie moved closer, her eyes wide, but not afraid. She crouched beside him, her hand resting on his coat. Her voice came again, soft as snow. "It's still there." Ben straightened, heart hammering in his chest. He didn't say it, but he knew. Whatever was beneath their floor, it wasn't just hiding. It was waiting. Ben grabs the old crowbar from the tool chest, pries loose the board. Dust erupts. Ellie leans forward, and then a pair of golden eyes blink up from the shadows below. The board groaned as Ben pried it up, the old wood splintering at the edges. Dust exploded into the air, thick and stale, carrying with it the scent of earth, rot, and something older, like old blood left too long in the sun. He coughed once, waving it away. Ellie crouched beside him, her breath quick, eyes locked on the darkness beneath the floor. Ben leaned over the opening, poker in hand, shoulders tense. Then he saw them. Golden eyes, wide, watching. A low whimper followed, a sound of pain, not threat. Ben's pulse slowed, confusion overtaking his fear. He angled the flashlight from his phone into the crawl space. What he saw stopped him cold. A large German shepherd lay curled in the dirt, ribs showing through a patchy coat smeared with dried blood. Her chest rose in shallow rhythm. One of her front legs was swollen, possibly broken, and a thin line of scarring ran from her left shoulder to her flank. She tried to lift her head but dropped it with a weak whine. But she wasn't alone. 3 tiny pups were nestled against her side, barely moving, eyes not yet open. Their small bodies trembled with every breath. One squeaked and rooted clumsily against her for warmth. Ben exhaled slowly, shoulders dropping. He hadn't expected this. A raccoon, maybe, possum, not this. Behind him, Ellie whispered, "Is she dying?" Her voice was clear, the most she'd spoken in months. Ben didn't turn. He didn't want her to see his face. "She's hurt. Real bad." "But she's not gone." He hesitated, then reached slowly into the hole. The mother's ears flicked. She growled, weak but sharp, baring her teeth. Instinct, protection. Even on the edge of death, she was defending her young. Ben froze, voice low. "Easy, girl. I'm not here to hurt you." The growl faded into a low, unsure rumble. Her eyes stayed locked on his, but her body sagged. She didn't have the strength to fight. Ellie stepped closer, her stuffed rabbit under one arm. She knelt beside him, peering down, lips trembling. "She's beautiful." Ben almost corrected her. The dog looked wrecked, broken, but in Ellie's eyes, maybe beauty had a different shape now. "She's not just hiding," Ellie murmured, barely a breath. "She's waiting." Ben looked at his daughter, startled. The words carried more weight than she likely understood. He reached again, more carefully this time. The German shepherd sniffed his hand. Her lips twitched. Another growl, but softer. Then she let him touch her. He slid his arms gently beneath her body, feeling ribs like piano keys beneath her matted fur. She whimpered, but didn't snap. One of the pups squealed. Ellie gasped. "The babies? I got her. You grabbed them. Real gentle." Ellie's hands trembled, but she moved like she'd done it 1,000 times. She cradled the pups in her arms and tucked them into her coat. They squirmed weakly against her chest. Ben lifted the mother up slowly. She was heavier than expected, all dead weight and pain. He laid her down on a folded blanket near the stove, where the fire had started to warm the room. She shivered once, then stilled. The pups nuzzled blindly against her belly. Ben moved quickly, an old rhythm kicking in. He cleaned her wounds with water and alcohol, ignoring the stink of infection. He found an old shirt in his duffel bag, tore it into strips, and bound the swollen leg as best he could. Ellie watched everything, silent now, but focused. "She's been hurt a long time," Ben said finally, voice quiet. "Weeks, maybe." He didn't say what they both knew. The dog shouldn't have survived this long. Not with that leg. Not in this cold. And yet she had. Ellie reached out and gently brushed the dog's ear. The animal tensed, then eased. Her eyes closed, just for a second. "What should we call her?" Ellie asked softly. Ben paused. He hadn't expected that. "I don't know. You pick." Ellie was quiet for a long time. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "Shadow." The dog's ear twitched. Ben nodded slowly. "Yeah, that fits." They stayed there for a while, the fire crackling softly, the storm outside still whispering through the trees. The cabin no longer felt hollow. It breathed, just a little. But Ben's mind didn't rest. Questions swirled. How had a dog, clearly once trained with intelligent eyes and old scars, ended up beneath their cabin? How did she survive with pups this young? And who did she belong to? That night, Ben barely slept. He sat up near the fire, watching Shadow breathe. Ellie dozed beside her, one hand resting gently on the smallest pup. When he finally closed his eyes, it wasn't long before he heard it again. A faint growl, low, from Shadow. She stood, limping, facing the door. Her fur bristled. Outside, the wind had died. But something cracked in the distance. A branch? A footstep? Ben stood quickly, heart racing. He moved to the window and peered out. Nothing but snow and trees. Still, the forest felt watchful. He turned back to Shadow, who hadn't moved. Her body was rigid, eyes locked on something he couldn't see. "Something's out there," he murmured. Ellie stirred on the floor. "She's guarding us," she said, eyes still half closed. Ben didn't answer. He wasn't sure which thought unsettled him more, the idea of something watching them from the woods, or the idea that whatever it was, Shadow had seen it before. The next morning, Ben finds boot tracks circling the cabin. Not his, not Ellie's, and not from a dog. The snow hadn't stopped. Ben stepped out onto the porch just after dawn, boots crunching into a fresh, untouched layer of powder. The air was razor-sharp, the kind of cold that didn't just bite, it burrowed. The trees stood still, the world hushed like it was holding its breath. He tightened his coat and moved toward the edge of the cabin. That's when he saw them. Tracks. Not animal. Not Ellie. Not his. Boot prints. Big ones. Worn tread. A long, slow circle around the cabin. He crouched, tracing one with his gloved hand. The edges hadn't begun to soften yet. These were fresh, made sometime during the night, while they slept. No drag marks. No running. Whoever made them had walked slow. Deliberate. Ben rose, every muscle in his body coiled. Some things that walk these woods don't want to be seen. That thought hit him like a whisper in the ear, uninvited and cold. He scanned the tree line. Pine needles trembled under the weight of frost. Shadows stretched long between the trunks, but nothing moved. Still, his skin prickled, like he was being watched. Back inside, Ellie was already awake, sitting beside Shadow, feeding the pups drops of milk from a syringe. She looked up when he entered. "Did she sleep?" she asked. Ben hesitated. "She dozed. Not deeply." Shadow lay stretched near the fire, her head resting across her paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. Her ears twitched before Ben even closed the door. She was listening. "She's still guarding," Ellie murmured. "Yeah." Ben dropped his gloves beside the stove. "So am I." He didn't tell her about the tracks, not yet. Instead, he poured himself coffee from the tin pot and sat on the edge of the couch. His back ached. He hadn't slept well since Denver, but this was different. This wasn't just grief gnawing at the edges. This was instinct. Something was off. He turned to Shadow, noting the way her eyes kept darting toward the window, as if she could still feel whatever had passed by the night before. "She sees more than we do," Ellie said, watching him. Ben nodded. "She does." The morning dragged on in uneasy quiet. Ellie sketched at the table, something she'd started doing again since they'd found Shadow. Ben watched from a distance, marveling at how steady her hand was, how focused her eyes looked when she drew. It was like pieces of her were slowly knitting themselves back together. But the drawings, they unsettled him. This one was of the cabin, accurate, detailed. But in the background, half shrouded in scribbled trees, was a man, just a silhouette, no face, watching from the woods. He walked over and knelt beside her. "Who's that?" Ellie's pencil paused. She didn't look at him. "I don't know," she whispered. "But I saw him last night, in my dream." Ben said nothing, but his hand closed around the edge of the table. That evening, he went back outside with a flashlight and began a wider sweep. The wind had picked up, but the tracks were still there, stretching past the cabin, then disappearing into the woods. 100 feet out, half buried beneath a tangle of dead branches, he found something else. Metal, thin, round. He brushed away the snow, revealing a dog tag. The name was almost worn smooth. D. Reyes USMC K9 Handler. His stomach dropped. He turned it over. On the back, a phone number, the last 4 digits scorched off. He stood there for a long time, thumb tracing the edges. Someone had been here before, someone with a dog, someone military, and they never made it out. Back inside, he sat at the table and turned the tag over in his hands while Ellie stirred soup over the fire. The pups squeaked in the corner. Shadow hadn't moved. She hadn't even looked at the tag. But her tail twitched just once. "Do you know this?" he asked softly. Shadow lifted her head. Her eyes locked with his. She didn't blink. Ellie brought over 2 bowls and set one in front of him. Her face was tight with concern. Ben slid the tag across the table toward her. Her fingers curled over the edge. "I think she belonged to someone," she whispered. "Before us." Ben nodded slowly. "Yeah, she did." That night, the wind howled harder. Branches snapped somewhere out in the woods. Ben kept the poker close. The fire cast long shadows on the cabin walls. He sat on the floor beside the couch, watching Shadow. She didn't sleep. Not really. Every time the wind shifted, she growled, low, threatening. Around 2 a.m., he thought he saw a flicker of movement beyond the window, just a flash, like someone stepping between trees. He rushed outside with the flashlight. Nothing, but the feeling stayed. He wasn't alone. They weren't alone. When he finally returned inside, Ellie was awake, sitting upright. "He's getting closer," she said simply. Ben didn't ask how she knew. The next morning, he made a decision. They were going into town, supplies were running low, and there were questions he needed answers to, about this dog, this tag, and the man who might still be walking the woods. Before they left, he slipped the tag into his coat pocket. As they climbed into the truck, Shadow sat at the window watching them pull away, her gaze sharp, protective. Ben glanced in the rearview mirror. He didn't notice the fresh set of tracks leading up behind the cabin, stopping just short of the front door. Later that night, someone pounds on the door. Ellie freezes. Ben grabs the poker. A man stands in the snow, staring in through the glass. And he's not a stranger to this place. The knock was sharp, not timid, not accidental. Ben froze mid-step, one hand still gripping the lantern, the other wrapped around the cold iron poker. Ellie looked up from the floor, where she'd been feeding the smallest pup, her face pale. The knock came again, louder this time, 3 steady thuds that echoed across the cabin's worn walls. Shadow was already at the door, her body stiff, hackles raised. A low growl rumbled in her chest. She planted herself between the door and Ellie without hesitation, teeth bared. Ben raised a finger to his lips, motioning for Ellie to stay put. He crept toward the door and looked through the frosted side window. A figure stood just beyond the porch light. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a tattered brown coat, dark knit cap pulled low. Snow clung to his boots. His breath came out in heavy clouds. Ben didn't recognize the face. But something in the man's posture, relaxed like he belonged here, made the hair on Ben's neck rise. He unlatched the door and cracked it open just enough to speak through. "Can I help you?" Ben asked, voice flat. The man didn't answer right away. He looked past Ben, into the cabin. His eyes paused on Ellie and the pups, then on Shadow, who let out another sharp bark. Then he smiled, or sneered. It was hard to tell. "You bought this place for $5, he said slowly, voice rasped by years of cigarettes. "But you'll pay more than that to keep it." Ben stepped outside, closing the door behind him with a soft click. The snow bit at his ankles. The poker hung loose in his grip. "You got a name?" Ben asked. The man chuckled. "Maybe." Ben didn't move. "You've been around here before. I saw the tracks. I walk where I want. These woods don't belong to anyone." "They do now," Ben said, stepping closer. "You're trespassing." "I ain't trespassing." His eyes narrowed. "You are." Ben stared. The man didn't flinch. "This cabin's got history," the stranger added. "Not the kind you write in books. Blood in the floorboards, screams in the walls. Ask around if anyone still remembers. Ain't many do." "What's your name?" Ben repeated, voice sharper now. The man leaned in, breath heavy with tobacco and rot. "Ray Dalton." The name clicked in Ben's mind like a trigger pulled. He didn't show it, but the memory surged. That name scribbled on the edge of the dog tag he'd found. The old survivalist Clara had mentioned in passing, the one who vanished years ago. "You knew the dog?" Ben asked carefully. Ray's smile vanished. "She don't belong to you." "She doesn't belong to you either." "She remembers things," Ray said. "She saw things she wasn't supposed to. And now you've gone and dug her up like bones in a graveyard." From behind the door, Shadow snarled, a sound that came from deep in her chest, primal, protective. Ray stepped back, just a half step, but his hand moved toward the handle of a long hunting knife strapped to his hip. Ben tightened his grip on the poker. "Turn around," Ben said calmly. "Now." Ray looked at the poker, then at Ben. Something flickered in his eyes, not fear, something colder, calculation. "You're just like her," he said. Ben blinked. "Who?" "Your wife." He said it like a knife twist. "She came here once too, thought she was going to fix this place, make it into something better. That didn't work out so well either, did it?" Before Ben could respond, Shadow slammed into the door behind him, barking furiously. The sound was deafening in the night air. Ray flinched and took another step back. The knife stayed in its sheath, but just barely. Ben used the moment. He raised the poker and stepped off the porch. "Last warning," Ray grinned without joy. "Stay if you want. Raise your little girl here. Let that mutt sleep by the fire. But don't say you weren't warned." He turned and walked into the trees, boots crunching through the snow. The darkness swallowed him within seconds. Ben stood still for a long time, the poker still raised, breath steaming in the frozen air. When he finally turned around, Ellie was standing at the door, arms wrapped around the smallest pup. Shadow was beside her, ears twitching, eyes locked on the forest. Ben stepped back inside and bolted the door. He crouched in front of Ellie, brushing snow from his coat. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, but her eyes told another story. "He knew about Mum," she whispered. "Did you hear him?" Ben nodded slowly. "I heard." He stood and placed the poker back by the fire, then turned and looked at Shadow. She had stopped growling, but her body was still coiled tight. Ben sat down beside her. "Good girl," he murmured. She didn't move, just kept her gaze fixed on the window, like she could still see him out there. That night, Ben didn't sleep. Neither did Shadow. The wind howled, and every snap of a tree branch made him flinch. He replayed Ray's words over and over. Anna had been here. She'd come to this cabin before her death, and never told him. Shadow had been here before too, and somehow Ray Dalton was the thread that tied them all together. The next morning, after a breakfast neither of them really touched, Ellie sat at the table, flipping through an old sketch pad. Her fingers paused on a folded piece of fabric sticking out from beneath one of the pages. She pulled it free. A red scarf. Faded, dusty, but unmistakable. Ben's heart dropped into his stomach. He crossed the room slowly, kneeling beside her. Ellie held the scarf out like it might break. "She wore this," she said, voice shaking, "the day she died." Ben took it in his hands. The fabric was rough. Familiar. The last time he saw it, it had been around Anna's neck. At the funeral, it was missing. He looked toward Shadow, who watched him without blinking. It wasn't over. Not even close. Ben holds the scarf, eyes locked on Shadow. Ellie asks, "Do you think she came here looking for something?" Ben doesn't answer, but his silence says everything. Ben sat at the edge of the couch, the red scarf draped across his lap like a wound that had just reopened. Ellie watched him from the table, her hands folded tightly in front of her. The room was quiet, except for the occasional crackle from the stove and the soft squeaks of the pups bundled up near Shadow. Outside, the snow had slowed to a hush, but the clouds above still hung heavy and grey, pressing the forest down with them. "She wore this," Ellie said again, her voice smaller now, like she wasn't sure if she was remembering it right. "The day she died." Ben nodded slowly, his fingers trembling as he ran them along the edge of the scarf. The stitching was loose in places, frayed in others. Anna had sewn it herself. He remembered teasing her about how bad she was with a needle. She'd laughed, said it didn't matter if it was ugly, it was warm. But it had disappeared in the crash. No one found it at the scene. And now, here it was, buried under floorboards in the same cabin they'd just stumbled into, except it wasn't random. Not anymore. He looked up at Shadow. The dog was watching him, still, not wagging, not moving, just watching, like she knew. "Do you think she came here looking for something?" Ellie asked. Ben didn't answer, but his silence said everything. He stood slowly and walked to the stove, scarf still in hand. The warmth didn't touch him. He was somewhere else now, in the memory of Anna, in the ache of her absence, in the mounting weight that maybe he hadn't known her as well as he thought. She didn't tell me, he said finally. She said she was driving out of town that day just to clear her head. I didn't ask where. Ellie looked down at her lap. She came here, Ben added quietly. She came to this cabin. Maybe more than once. He turned to the window. The forest stared back. But why this place? Ellie hesitated. Maybe because of Shadow. Ben glanced back. Shadow hadn't moved. She was already here, Ellie continued. Right? The puppies are new, but she's older. She looks like she's been through a war. Ben nodded, then pulled the dog tag from his coat pocket and placed it on the table beside Ellie. She probably has. Ellie ran her finger over the name. Reyes. Ben sat across from her. Marine, canine handler. My guess is Shadow was trained. Maybe saw combat. That limp, the way she tracks, the way she listens. It's not by accident. Ellie's gaze flicked from the tag to the scarf. Do you think Mum found her? I don't know, Ben admitted. But someone did. Someone who left both of these things behind. Ellie looked toward the back wall where the floorboards had once hidden Shadow and her pups. She was hiding, but not from us. Ben felt something shift in his gut, and something he hadn't wanted to admit. She was hiding from him, he said, standing again. Ray? Ellie asked. Ben nodded. He knew her. That much is clear. He recognized her, called her a mutt, said she remembers things she shouldn't. Ellie's voice dropped to a whisper. Do you think he hurt her? Ben's jaw tightened. I think it's more complicated than that. He stared at the scarf in his hands again, then folded it carefully and slid it into his jacket pocket. We're going into town, he said. There's someone I want you to meet. They bundled up and loaded into the truck. The road was slick, but passable now. Snow had thinned enough to see the gravel underneath. The world outside was a dull, grey palette of winter woods and half-buried fences. Ellie held the dog tag in her lap the entire ride, her thumb rubbing circles into the metal. Ben parked in front of a small general store on the edge of Brook Hollow. It was old. Tin roof, wooden porch, a faded sign that read, Mayfield Goods. Inside, the air smelled of cedar, apples, and coffee. Behind the counter stood a tall, silver-haired woman in a thick wool cardigan. Her eyes lit up as soon as she saw Ben. Well now, you're the fella who bought that cursed cabin, she said with a smile that was half warning. Ben smiled tightly. That's me, Clara Mayfield, she nodded. Guilty. What can I do for you, hun? Ben motioned toward Ellie. This is my daughter, Ellie. We were hoping you might remember someone. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the scarf and the dog tag. Clara's expression didn't change at first, but then her eyes dropped to the tag and stayed there. I know that name, she said softly. Ben stepped forward. Who was he? Daniel Reyes, Clara said. Marine. Used to live up the mountain past where you're staying. Kept to himself. Had a dog with him, German Shepherd, just like yours. Smart as a whip. The man vanished 2 years ago. Just gone. Ben exchanged a look with Ellie. Clara continued, her voice lower now. They say he was mixed up in something, or maybe he saw too much. Either way, the sheriff came snooping once, said he was investigating trafficking up through the forest roads, then he backed off. Quick. And Ray Dalton? Ben asked. Clara's expression darkened. Ray's poison. Used to run all kinds of garbage through the hills. Everyone knows. No one says. Lot of us hoped he froze out there. Ben looked down at the scarf in his hand. She knew something, he murmured. Clara's eyes softened. Your wife? He nodded. I think she came up here. I think she found Shadow. I think she found more than she bargained for. Clara reached across the counter, laying a hand gently on Ellie's. Your mamma was a brave woman, sweetheart. Brave enough to come looking when no one else would. Ben straightened. Do you know anyone else who knew Reyes? Clara thought for a moment. Zeke Turner. He served with him. Lives out past the river bend. You'll find him in the old stone house near the ridge. Ben nodded, grateful. They left the shop, the bell jingling behind them. As they drove, Ellie looked over at him. What if Shadow came back? Not because she was lost, but because she was sent. Ben didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached over and squeezed her hand gently. That's what we're gonna find out. Later that night, Ben sits by the fire, turning the scarf over in his hands again. Ellie sketches in silence. Behind her, Shadow's ears twitch toward the door, and Ben knows the forest isn't done with them yet. The wind had returned by nightfall, rattling the windows of the cabin like it wanted in. Ben sat by the fire, the red scarf folded across his lap, staring into the flames but not really seeing them. Ellie lay on her stomach by the coffee table, sketchbook open, pencil gliding across the paper without pause. The pups were curled up beside her, twitching in their dreams. Shadow, however, was not asleep. She sat by the door, rigid, ears pricked, eyes trained on the black forest beyond the window. She hadn't moved in nearly 30 minutes. Ben watched her in silence. Every now and then her nose twitched. A low rumble would start deep in her throat and fade just as quickly. Something out there had her attention, something that didn't belong. He set the scarf aside and stood. Shadow turned her head as he approached, but didn't take her eyes off the door. "You still smell him, don't you?" Ben whispered. The dog didn't react. She didn't need to. Ellie looked up. "Is it Ray?" "I don't know," Ben said. "Could be." Shadow's tail thumped once, slow, deliberate. Ellie sat up. "Why won't he leave us alone?" Ben sighed. "Because we found what he meant to bury." He pulled the old dog tag from the mantel and held it between his fingers. Reyes had been more than just a soldier, more than just Shadow's handler. He was a witness to something, maybe even a threat to Ray's secrets. And if Anna had crossed paths with him, Ben didn't want to finish the thought. The next morning, after a tense, sleepless night, they drove back into town. Ben needed more than rumors now. He needed clarity, and he knew exactly where to get it. They found the old stone house just past the ridge, tucked behind a grove of walnut trees, its roof sagging but still proud. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a beat-up jeep sat in the driveway. A wooden plaque by the door read, Z. Turner. Ben knocked. A few seconds passed before the door opened. The man who stood in the doorway was built like a boulder, short and broad, with thick shoulders and a jaw like a rock slide. His hair was salt and pepper, his beard full but trimmed, and his right pant leg ended just above a prosthetic. His eyes, though, were clear, alert, deep. Zeke Turner looked at Ben, then Ellie, then down to Shadow, who stood beside them. The world seemed to still. Zeke exhaled slowly. "Well, hell," he muttered. "You brought her back." Ben tilted his head. "You knew her." Zeke stepped outside without a coat, eyes never leaving Shadow. "She was Reyes's girl. Shadow Bravo, K9 Recon Unit. Afghanistan, 2012. Shadow took a step toward him. Zeke didn't flinch. Instead, he knelt, holding out his hand. She approached slowly, limping slightly, but not growling. She sniffed his fingers, then let him touch her. "She saved my life once," Zeke said softly, almost like a prayer. "Took a round to the leg to drag me out of a hot zone. I thought she was gone." "She's been hiding under our cabin," Ben said. "With pups." Zeke looked up, surprised. "She had a litter?" Ben nodded. 3. One didn't make it. Zeke's gaze dropped. "She must have run for miles. She wouldn't stop unless someone made her." Ellie spoke for the first time. "Do you think she was running from Ray?" Zeke's jaw tightened. "Ray Dalton's still alive?" Ben nodded grimly. Zeke stood. Then yeah, it's possible. They went inside. The house was warm, cluttered with maps, military plaques, and a half-finished wood carving of a soldier kneeling beside a dog. Over mugs of bitter coffee, Zeke told them about Reyes. He was my best friend. After we got out, he came back here. Couldn't sleep, couldn't talk to anyone but Shadow. He was paranoid near the end, said someone was following him, watching the cabin. He wouldn't tell me everything, but I know this. He was working on something, a report, files, about the mountain routes, said they were being used for more than logging and hunting. Trafficking? Ben asked. Zeke nodded. Drugs. Maybe people too. He found something. Or someone. Then he disappeared. Ben pulled out the scarf and laid it on the table. Zeke stared. This yours? My wife's, Ben said. She died last year, but I found it under the floorboards, same place we found Shadow. Zeke was quiet for a long time. She came here, Ben added. I think she found Reyes, or what was left of him. Maybe Shadow too, but she never told me. I think she was trying to figure it out. Zeke stood, walked to a shelf, and pulled down an old manila envelope. He handed it to Ben. This is everything Reyes gave me before he vanished. I didn't know what to do with it, but maybe now's the time. Ben opened it. Inside were maps, handwritten notes, names. One of them circled in red. Raymond Dalton. This proves it, Ben muttered. Zeke nodded. You gonna run this to the sheriff? Ben shook his head. Not yet. Not until I know exactly what I'm dealing with. Ellie looked up at them. What if Mum left something behind too? Ben met her eyes. Then we're gonna find it. They left just before dusk. As they climbed into the truck, Zeke stepped onto the porch. Keep her safe, he said, nodding toward Shadow. She's more than a dog. She's a witness. The drive back was quiet. The scarf sat between them on the seat, like a ghost. That night, Ellie sketched while Ben spread out the maps on the table. Shadow lay nearby, one eye always open. When Ellie finally went to sleep, Ben stayed up, poring over the notes. Some entries were messy, frantic. One stood out. There's something buried out there, something I wasn't supposed to find, but Shadow saw it, and she remembers. The wind howled again, louder this time. Ben looked up, suddenly aware of how cold the room had gotten. He crossed to the door, cracked it open. There, just at the edge of the trees, stood a figure, not moving, watching. His breath hitched, but when he blinked, it was gone. Ben shuts the door, but can't shake the feeling. Later that night, while brushing Shadow's fur, his hand freezes. Just behind her ear is something he hadn't noticed before. Tattooed numbers. Military code. Proof. Ben couldn't sleep. The maps were still spread out across the table, Reyes's scrawled handwriting looping across them like veins, nervous, paranoid veins that pulsed with half-formed thoughts and frantic warnings. The scarf sat folded beside them, untouched. Shadow lay on the floor nearby, her eyes closed, but her ears twitched at every sound. Ben sat in the worn armchair by the fire, rubbing his eyes with the heels of his hands. Outside, the wind had died down, but the silence felt heavier than any storm. He stood, stretched his back, and crossed to where Shadow rested. She lifted her head as he approached, alert, but calm. "Hey, girl," he murmured, kneeling down. "You holding up better than me?" He began to brush her fur, slow and rhythmic. She leaned into it slightly, a small comfort after days of tension. His hand moved behind her ear, then paused. Something was there. He shifted her fur aside gently, careful not to spook her. Beneath the thick coat, just behind her left ear, were a series of small, faded numbers. Tattooed, M113-24B. Ben froze. His breath hitched. It was military, an identification code, not just any dog, not just a trained canine. This was a government asset, registered. Tracked. He reached for Reyes's folder and thumbed through the documents until he found what he was hoping not to. A matching number scribbled next to a phrase. Shadow Bravo, Recon Unit, Experimental Recall Program. Ben sat back on his heels. You were more than just a partner. You were part of something bigger. Shadow looked at him, her eyes deep and still. Ellie's voice cut through the quiet. What's wrong? He turned. She stood in the doorway to the hallway, her hair messy, one of the pups nestled in her arms. Ben didn't lie. I found something. A tattoo. It confirms she was part of a military recall program. Experimental. Ellie hugged the pup closer. So she remembers orders? Ben nodded. And maybe more than that. He handed her the paper with the matching code. Ellie studied it, her brows furrowing. Recall program sounds like mind control. Ben exhaled. Not exactly, but close. These dogs were trained to respond to voice patterns, location cues, even faces. Deep muscle memory. Could operate behind enemy lines without handlers. It was classified. Ellie sat down beside Shadow, gently brushing her fingers along the faded numbers. She didn't forget anything. Ben whispered the words he'd just been thinking. Some memories don't fade. They wait. Ellie looked up at him, wide-eyed. That's what she's doing. She's waiting. Ben grabbed the envelope again, flipping through to a page near the back. Reyes had circled a location, deep in the hills, past an old ranger station. Scribbled next to it, burial site. Evidence stash. Shadow dug here before she ran. He looked at Ellie. I think she wants to go back. To that place? She asked. Isn't it dangerous? Ben nodded. Absolutely. But if she remembers what's out there, we might find what Reyes left behind. Maybe what Anna found, too. Ellie glanced toward the window, then down at the pup in her arms. What if he's watching again? He is, Ben said without hesitation. But we're not running. The next morning, they packed quickly. Ben loaded his old hiking gear into the truck. Compass, flares, rope, med kit. Shadow paced near the front door, tense and alert. The pups were left behind, bundled in a warm blanket near the fire with extra food and water. You sure you're okay staying here alone? Ben asked Ellie. She lifted her chin. I'm not alone. I've got them. And I've got Mum. He paused. You mean the scarf? No, she said. I mean her voice. In my head. It's like she's guiding me through this. Ben's chest tightened, but he nodded. Lock the door. Don't open it unless it's me. She nodded and hugged him tight before stepping back. Shadow jumped into the passenger seat like it was her job. They drove for over an hour, cutting through switchbacks and backcountry trails until the GPS gave up. The sun was a pale smear behind the clouds. Snow was thin here, but stubborn, crunching beneath the tires. Finally, Ben spotted the clearing, just like the map described. A crumbling fire tower loomed overhead, long since abandoned. As soon as Ben stepped out, Shadow leapt from the truck and took off, nose to the ground. Ben followed close, boots sinking into wet earth. They climbed over a downed log and past a rusted sign. Restricted, U.S. Forestry depth. Shadow stopped. Her whole body tensed. She barked once, sharp and urgent, then began to dig. Ben dropped to his knees beside her and started clearing dirt with his hands. After 10 minutes, his fingers struck metal, a tin ammo box, sealed. He pried it open. Inside, a thumb drive, a stack of photographs, a folded note with Anna's handwriting. His heart stopped. He unfolded the note slowly. The ink was smeared, but legible. Ben, if you're reading this, it means Shadow found you. Keep her safe. The people she ran from are watching. I found Reyes's files. They're enough to bury Dalton for good. Use them. Tell Ellie I love her." Ben's hands shook. Shadow whined softly and nudged his arm. A branch snapped in the distance. Ben stood fast, scanning the trees. Then he saw it. A figure standing just behind the edge of the clearing. Ray, watching. Ben shoved the box into his pack, grabbed Shadow by the collar, and ran. Shots cracked through the trees, echoing like thunder. Bark exploded around him. He ducked, dragged Shadow behind a fallen trunk, heart pounding. More silence, then footsteps, getting closer. Ben whispered into Shadow's ear. "Oh, you remember what to do. I hope to God you do." She stared at him, then bolted in the opposite direction, through the brush, fast and silent, drawing the footsteps with her. Ben waited, held his breath, and then, in the distance, a bark, followed by a scream. Ben didn't hesitate. He ran toward it. Ben reaches Shadow, blood on her muzzle, Ray unconscious at her feet. But something isn't right. Ray wasn't alone. The forest was a blur of motion and breath. Ben ducked low, branches clawing at his jacket as he sprinted toward the scream. His boots thudded against frozen earth, slipping on patches of moss and loose stones. Somewhere ahead, Shadow had vanished into the trees, and Ray's cry still echoed in his ears. "Let her be okay. Let her be okay." When he broke through the thicket, the scene hit him like a punch to the chest. Ray Dalton lay sprawled on the ground, groaning, blood soaking his left thigh. His rifle sat a few feet away, half buried in the snow. Shadow stood over him, muzzle stained red, growling low, protective, not of Ray, but of whatever secrets the man still held. Ben moved fast, kicking the rifle further from reach. He checked Shadow first, no injuries, no wounds. She'd taken him down clean, efficient. She was trained for this. Ray coughed, tried to prop himself up, then collapsed again. Ben grabbed a handful of the man's coat and hauled him upright against a tree. "What the hell were you doing out here?" Ben snapped. Ray laughed, but it was a wet, broken sound. "You think this is about the dog?" "It's always been about the dog," Ben growled. "You knew Reyes. You knew my wife. You tried to bury them both." Ray's eyes flashed. "I didn't bury anyone. They buried themselves, getting involved in things they didn't understand." "You shot at me." "I warned you," Ray spat. "Told you this cabin wasn't meant for you." Ben clenched his fists. "You mean it wasn't meant for anyone to survive?" Ray smiled, bloody teeth. "Oh, you think I'm the monster here? I was a damn janitor, man, a cleaner. I got sent in after the government broke their toys and walked away." Ben frowned. "What the hell are you talking about?" Ray's breathing hitched. "They trained dogs like her to do more than just track and bark. Shadow wasn't just a soldier. She was a lockbox. They put things in her commands, locations, faces." Ben stepped back, shaken. "You're saying she knows something?" "Still." Ray nodded slowly. "And she's leading you to it. She always was." Ben didn't reply. He turned to Shadow, who stood alert, gaze never leaving Ray. "Who else is out here with you?" Ben asked. Ray's smile widened. That's when Ben heard it. A second set of footsteps, crunching snow, slow, heavy. Then a voice, deep, calm, and far too close. "I'd put the gun down if I were you." Ben turned slowly to find a second man stepping out from the trees, clean-cut, military-bearing, late 50s. He wore a black winter parka and gloves, no weapon in sight, but his posture said he didn't need one. Ray barked a laugh from the ground. "Told you." Ben didn't lower the gun. "Who are you?" The man smiled. "Name's Monroe. Let's just say I was Reyes's last commanding officer, and yours, in a way." "I don't follow orders." "Not anymore, maybe," Monroe said, stepping closer. "But that dog, she still might." Ben shifted, placing himself between Monroe and Shadow. "I found Reyes's files," Ben said. The ones he hid before he disappeared. Munro nodded. Then you know what's in them. Trafficking, bribes, unauthorized missions, all of it tied to me, if you read between the lines. You killed him, Ben said coldly. Munro shrugged. He didn't leave me much choice. He was going to leak everything. Ben gritted his teeth. And Anna? Munro's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker in his eyes. Regret, maybe. Or calculation. She got close. Too close. I tried to warn her, told her not to go digging. You had her killed. No, Munro said flatly. I scared her. Hoped that'd be enough. The crash, that wasn't mine. But I didn't lose sleep over it. Ben raised his pistol, finger on the trigger. You should have. Munro raised a gloved hand. Easy now. You shoot me, you'll never get out of here. There's more coming. Clean-up team. 40 minutes, maybe less. Ben's heart raced. Why? To kill me? To erase all of this, Munro said. You, her, that dog, the files. This is protocol. Always has been. Ray groaned. Told you he wouldn't listen. Ben didn't hesitate. He stepped back, grabbed Shadow's collar, and bolted into the woods. Go! He shouted. Shadow obeyed, tearing through the underbrush at full speed. Munro didn't chase, but his voice echoed behind them. Run all you want, Matthews. You can't outrun command history. Ben didn't look back. He and Shadow weaved through the trees, deeper and deeper, until the terrain grew steeper. A frozen stream cut across the trail. They followed it uphill. Shadow suddenly stopped. She barked once, then twice. Ben turned and saw it. A cave, low and narrow, almost invisible behind thick brush and snow. But it was there. Shadow nudged the opening, then looked back at him. You've done this before, Ben said, breathless. She pushed in first. He followed. Inside, the air was bitter cold, but dry. They moved deeper, the cave opening up into a low, hollow chamber. In the corner, half frozen under a blue tarp, was a box. Another one. Ben pulled it out with numb fingers. Inside, a second thumb drive. A voice recorder, more maps, a memory card labelled Shadow Protocol. Ben turned on the recorder. The voice was Anna's. If you found this, it means I couldn't stop them. Reyes was right. They were experimenting on the dogs. Encoding GPS locations, faces, kill orders into their training. Shadow was the last one. She got out, but they want her back. Not because of what she is, but because of what she knows. Ben's chest ached. Anna had known. She had risked everything, and she had left him this proof. Outside, the sound of engines rumbled in the distance. The clean-up team had arrived. Ben looked at Shadow. We don't hide anymore, he said. We expose them. She barked once, as if in agreement. Ben sends the files to Zeke with a backup plan, but the cabin is no longer safe. As he and Ellie prepare to leave, someone breaks in. Shadow lunges first. The sun had barely crested the mountains by the time Ben and Shadow reached the truck, lungs burning, boots soaked through, the stolen files zipped tight in a waterproof bag. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other clutching the memory card labelled Shadow Protocol. He didn't speak, neither did Shadow. The air inside the cab was dense with adrenaline and smoke-thin fear. By the time they pulled into the driveway, the cabin looked small again, fragile, like it could be swept away in a strong enough wind. Ellie opened the front door before he even reached the steps, eyes wide. "You're okay," she breathed, voice cracking as she threw herself into his arms. "I'm okay," he whispered back, clutching her tighter than he meant to. "We don't have much time." She stepped aside, and he ushered Shadow in before locking the door behind him. He moved quickly, plugging the drive into his laptop, heart pounding. The screen flickered. Dozens of files popped up. Logs, personnel lists, GPS routes, audio files. It was everything Reyes had promised, and more. He uploaded the entire archive to a private cloud, then composed a message to Zeke. If you're reading this and I'm not answering, release it, all of it. Let the world see who they really are. He hit send. Then he turned to Ellie, who stood in the middle of the room holding a flashlight and a backpack, waiting for orders. She wasn't crying anymore. She was ready. "We're not staying here tonight," Ben said. "Grab the essentials. Food, warm clothes. I'll prep the truck." "Where are we going?" she asked. "Zeke's. Then we disappear for a while." "What about Shadow?" Ben looked down at her. She stood alert, tail twitching, pacing the floor like she could already feel something coming. "She's coming with us. All of us. Together." Ellie nodded and moved to the bedroom. Ben turned back to the laptop and yanked the drive out. He pocketed it, then started grabbing gear, flashlights, flare gun, two-way radio. Shadow moved to the door, ears up. Then she growled, low, warning. Ben froze. He grabbed the radio and clicked it on. Static. Then, "They've already breached the outer perimeter." A voice. Male. Cold. Not Zeke's. Ben turned toward Ellie's door. "Down!" "Now!" The window shattered. Glass exploded inward as the door cracked under pressure. Heavy boots pounded across the porch. Ben reached for the flare gun and fired, straight at the front window. Red fire lit up the night, blinding the attackers for half a second. Shadow lunged with a snarl that shook the cabin. The first man through the door didn't even see her coming. She hit him low and hard, teeth sinking into his thigh, dragging him down with a guttural growl. He screamed, his weapon clattering to the floor. Ben tackled the second before he could react, slamming the man's rifle away and driving his fist into his jaw. Bone cracked. The man hit the floor. Another flash outside, someone circling toward the back. Ben turned, grabbed Ellie and shoved her toward the crawlspace hatch behind the stove. "Go! Now!" "I'm not leaving you." He cupped her face. "You're not. You're hiding, just until I give the signal." She hesitated, but the fear in his eyes said everything. She slipped into the crawlspace, pulling the hatch shut just as another man burst in from the back. Ben ducked behind the kitchen counter and fired the flare gun again. This time, it hit the wall above the door and erupted into light and smoke, buying them precious seconds. Shadow had pinned the first man, blood spreading beneath him. She looked to Ben for the next command. "Guard Ellie," he said. She bolted to the stove, teeth bared, planting herself between the hatch and the attackers. Ben reached the laptop. Smoke stung his eyes. He opened the last audio file from the drive and hit play. A voice filled the room. Calm, unmistakable. Reyes. "This is Sergeant Daniel Reyes, U.S. Marine Corps. If you're hearing this, then I'm gone. But Shadow's alive, and she's the key. We were used, me, her, dozens of others. They embedded memory markers, location coordinates, facial recognition patterns into the dogs. Weaponized memory. We were the field test. It went sideways. People died. We ran. Shadow remembered everything." The men paused. Even the intruder in the back froze at the sound of the dead man's voice. Ben stared them down. "You want her?" he said. "You'll have to kill me, but this file's already gone. My friend has a copy. You kill us, this goes viral. You walk away now. Maybe you stay out of prison." Silence. Then the front man, bleeding from his mouth, spoke. "She's a liability." Ben didn't blink. "She's a survivor." The man raised his weapon, and then Shadow moved. Fast, a blur of fur and fury. She leapt, snarling, knocking him flat again. Ben lunged forward, tackling the other, disarming him in one brutal strike. It was over in seconds. Groans, blood, silence. Ben locked eyes with the last conscious attacker. "I gave you a choice," he said coldly. "You made the wrong one." The man spit blood, sneering. "There are more coming." Ben didn't flinch. "Let them come." He turned to the hatch and opened it. Ellie crawled out, wide-eyed but steady. "We need to go," she said. Now. Ben nodded. Grab the pups. Ellie scooped them up, wrapping them tight in a blanket. Ben took one last look around the cabin. The fire still burned. The scarf still lay draped over the chair. He picked it up and tied it around Ellie's neck. Let's finish what she started. They slipped into the night, the cabin behind them flickering in the wind like a dying lantern. As they drive towards Zeke's, Ben checks the rearview mirror. Headlights, too close. Ellie tightens the scarf. Shadow growls low. It's not over yet. The tires slid slightly as Ben tore down the icy mountain road, one hand on the wheel, the other gripping the gear shift like it was the only thing anchoring him to reality. The cabin was now a memory, a smouldering one at best. Ellie sat in the back, arms wrapped around the bundle of pups like they were sacred. Shadow was in the passenger seat, ears up, body tense, gaze locked on the side mirror. Behind them, headlights burned through the fog, trailing close, too close. "How long have they been following?" Ellie asked, voice tight. Ben glanced again. "Since the ridge, same SUV, same distance." "They're not trying to pass us," she said. "They're herding us." Ben nodded. "That's what I'm afraid of." Shadow gave a low growl, rumbling deep from her chest. It wasn't fear, it was warning. Ben downshifted as they rounded a bend, the truck's tires screaming over patches of black ice. The trees on either side leaned in, silhouettes in the night, sharp, ghost-like. There was no one else on the road, just them and the shadows. Ellie reached forward, her hand gripping Ben's shoulder. "We're not going to Zeke's, are we?" He shook his head. "We can't lead them there." "Then where?" Ben's jaw tightened. "Somewhere I haven't been in a long time." He took the next fork off the main road without signaling, wheels crunching over gravel. The headlights behind them didn't hesitate. They followed. He pushed the truck harder, faster. They whipped past old hunting cabins and frozen creeks, dipping into valleys where the signal bars disappeared. The world got darker the deeper they went, and quieter. That's when Ben said it, half to himself, half to Ellie. "Sometimes you don't run to escape. You run to remember where the truth began." The headlights behind them swerved. Ben saw it in the mirror. 2 more pairs of lights appeared behind the first SUV. Reinforcements. 3 in total. "We're boxed in," he muttered. "Then we make a new exit," Ellie said, her voice low but solid. Ben glanced at her in the mirror. She looked just like Anna in that moment, fear in her eyes, but fire in her voice. He slammed the brakes and yanked the wheel hard right, sending the truck veering down a narrow, unmarked trail, snow untouched, branches scraping the sides. The terrain was rough, bouncing them like popcorn inside a tin, but Ben didn't let up. The truck was built for punishment, and right now, that's exactly what it was taking. Behind them, the SUVs followed, but not all of them could handle the turn. The last one clipped a tree and spun out, gone. 2 remained. Ellie gripped the pups tighter. "Where does this go?" Ben didn't answer, because he wasn't sure. This trail, he knew it vaguely from years ago, when he and Anna used to hike these woods. It led to the old fire break at the edge of the cliffs. If they made it there. "There," he said suddenly, pointing through the windshield. The trees opened up ahead, revealing a wide clearing with a steep drop beyond. Below, the frozen lake. Solid, glass-like. A full 100 feet down. He braked hard and jerked the wheel to spin the truck around, nose toward the woods. Lights behind them caught up fast, the remaining 2 SUVs bursting into the clearing and skidding to a stop in a pincer formation. 3 men got out of each vehicle, tactical gear, rifles, comms units. Ben stepped out of the truck slowly, hands raised. "Stay in the truck," he whispered to Ellie. "No matter what." She didn't move. Shadow climbed out beside him. The men formed a half circle, weapons raised. One of them stepped forward, Monroe, calm, polished, untouchable. "You've made this far more complicated than it needed to be," Munro said. "I gave you a chance to walk away." Ben laughed, bitter and sharp. "No, you gave me a chance to forget, and I don't forget what you did to her." Munro glanced at Shadow. "We want the dog. That's it. Give her to us, and I'll pretend the last 48 hours never happened." "She's not just a dog," Ben said. "She's a witness. And I've already sent her testimony to someone who won't stay quiet." Munro's jaw flexed. "You're bluffing." "Check your inbox," Ben replied. Munro tapped his earpiece, waited, then he swore under his breath. One of the men stepped forward, weapon trembling. "Sir." "Orders?" Munro raised his hand. "Shadow," Ben whispered. "Go." The dog bolted, not toward the woods, but toward the nearest man. Distraction. Ben reached into his coat and threw a flare grenade from Reyes's old kit. The clearing lit up in a wall of red smoke. Screams erupted. Gunfire. Ben ducked, rolled, tackled one man and disarmed him, using the rifle butt to knock him cold. Shadow moved like lightning. Dodge, strike, retreat. Controlled chaos. Ellie burst from the truck, a flare in one hand, a scream in her throat. "Ben!" He turned in time to see one of the attackers rounding on her. Without thinking, Ben fired. One shot. The man dropped. Ellie collapsed behind the truck, holding the pups tight. Safe. More gunfire. Munro shouting commands. Ben grabbed Ellie's arm and hauled her up. "Get in!" They threw the pups inside, Shadow right behind them. Ben slid in, reversed fast, then gunned it toward the cliff. Ellie screamed, "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. They hit the edge. For a split second, the truck flew, weightless, terrifying. Then, crash! Ice exploded around them. Freezing water swallowed the truck whole. They sank. Ben kicked open the door, grabbed Ellie and the pups, and pulled hard. Shadow swam beside them, paddling fast. They broke the surface, gasping. Above, on the cliff, flashlights searched, but no one dared follow. They drifted to the shore, soaked, shivering. Ben pulled them onto the ice, then collapsed beside Ellie. She looked at him, eyes wide, lips blue. He smiled through chattering teeth. "We bought a cabin," he said, voice hoarse. "Now we own a manhunt." She laughed, tears spilling. Shadow curled beside them, growling low again. Ben turned. Figures stood at the edge of the trees. Not Munro's men. Locals, hunters, Zeke among them, rifles in hand. Ben grinned. It's about time. Zeke and the hunters helped them escape. But Ben knows this isn't over. They need to bring it into the light. The only way to kill the secret is to make it public. Snow crunched beneath their boots as Zeke led them through the tree line, his rifle cradled across his chest, scanning every shadow. Behind him came two other hunters from the town, old-timers, quiet but deadly serious. They didn't ask questions. They'd seen enough in the past 20 minutes to know this wasn't about deer anymore. Ben stumbled slightly, Ellie still clinging to his side, soaked and shivering, the pups bundled against her chest. Shadow walked beside them like a ghost, silent but alert, her steps precise despite the cold biting at her paws. They reached Zeke's jeep, hidden off an unmarked trail. The engine coughed to life with a reluctant growl. Zeke tossed his rifle in the back and motioned for Ben to load up. "No time for stories," he said. "Just get in." Ben looked back toward the woods. The cliff they'd just come from was quiet now, no more flashlights. The men who had chased them had disappeared into the trees or maybe the lake, but Ben knew better. This was just a pause, not the end. Inside the jeep, Zeke floored it, tires spinning, mud and snow flinging behind them. The heater blasted dry air as Ellie huddled close to Shadow in the back seat. Ben sat up front, staring at the road. "You sent the files?" Zeke asked without looking over. "Yeah," Ben said. "Encrypted upload. If anything happens to me, it goes to every reporter with a pulse. Zeke nodded. Then we've got leverage. Ben's fingers tightened around the door handle. It's not enough. It's something. It's not justice, Ben said. Not yet. Zeke didn't reply. They drove in silence for nearly an hour, cutting through forgotten fire roads until they reached Zeke's place, a run-down hunting lodge nestled deep into a ravine, satellite internet, solar power, off-grid in the truest sense. As soon as they got inside, Ben stripped off his wet clothes and changed into dry gear from Zeke's stash. Ellie did the same, wrapping herself and the pups in wool blankets. Shadow lay by the fire, steam rising from her soaked coat. Zeke handed Ben a fresh cup of black coffee. You've got until morning, maybe less. Ben nodded, rubbing his hands together. I'm not running again. Zeke raised an eyebrow. Then what's the move? Ben stepped over to the table and laid out everything. The hard drives, the thumbsticks, Reyes's notes, Anna's handwriting. He looked at Zeke and said the words that had been building since the first night in the cabin. The only way to kill a secret is to set it on fire. Zeke blew out a slow breath. You're talking full broadcast? Everything. Public, unfiltered, no deniability. Once it's out, there's no putting it back. Zeke stared at the files. You realize they'll burn everything to keep this buried? I know, Ben said, which is why we don't just leak it. We give it a face. We make it human. Ellie sat up, eyes wide. We tell Mum's story. Ben nodded. Anna, Reyes, the dogs, the entire experiment, the corruption. Shadow's memory is the thread that connects it all. Zeke rubbed his beard. You planning to go live? Ben picked up the recorder. She already did. Reyes, Anna, they both left messages. I just have to put them together. By morning, Ben had done just that. Zeke's lodge was quiet, but wired. A satellite dish on the roof, a solar-charged backup battery pack, and a dusty old laptop that still hummed to life. Ben worked through the night. He spliced Reyes's voice message with Anna's final recording, added photos of the cabin, of the pups, of Shadow standing over Dalton. He recorded a message of his own, staring straight into the laptop camera. My name is Ben Matthews. I'm a father, a widower, and a former journalist. The government trained dogs to become memory weapons. They called it behavioral recall. And when the project went bad, they tried to erase it. But one dog survived. Her name is Shadow. She remembers. And now, so do we. He hit upload. The file encrypted itself, then launched to dozens of nodes across the dark web, public servers and secure newsrooms. Zeke stood behind him, watching. It's done, Ben said. Not yet, Zeke replied, turning toward the door. Lights flared in the valley below. 3 black SUVs, moving fast. Damn, Ben muttered. They tracked us. Ellie clutched the pups closer. What do we do now? Ben stepped toward the window, watching the vehicles approach. We finish it. He turned to Zeke. Can we hold this place? Zeke smiled grimly. I didn't build this place to be cozy. Shadow stood up from the fire, stretched, and came to stand at Ben's side. She was ready. So was he. He looked at Ellie, who didn't flinch. Get to the back room, Ben said. Barricade the door. If anything happens— You're coming with me, Ellie interrupted, eyes fierce. Ben smiled, proud. I'll be right behind you. He kissed her forehead and helped her into the safe room Zeke had built years ago, a steel-reinforced bunker with its own exit tunnel through the ridge. Then he turned back toward the front of the house, where Zeke had already taken position behind a sandbag mount and mounted an old hunting rifle with a scope. I can slow them down, Zeke said, but they'll breach. Ben checked his pistol, loaded a fresh mag. They're not getting Shadow, he said. The headlights grew closer. Tires squealed as they braked hard just outside the tree line. Doors opened. Boots hit snow. Then the voice, "Matthews, this is Monroe." "No more games. Come out now, and I'll let the girl walk." Ben stepped forward, opened the door, and walked onto the porch. Shadow followed. Ben raised his hands. "I already gave the truth to the world," he called. "So if you want to shut me up, you'll have to do it live." Monroe stepped forward, flanked by armed men. "We can make this look like an accident." Ben smiled coldly. "That's going to be hard, with 1,000 people watching." Behind him, the router's green light blinked. A live stream was running. He had left the webcam on. The mic, too. Monroe hesitated. Ben raised his voice, loud and clear. "You trained her to remember everything. Well, now the world remembers too." Monroe raised his weapon. Zeke fired first. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire explodes across the ridge. Ben and Shadow fight side by side. As Zeke buys them time, Ben leads Ellie through the tunnel. In the final moment, it's Shadow's memory that saves them all. Gunfire shattered the silence of dawn. The first shot rang out from Zeke's rifle, ripping through the cold air like thunder cracking across a frozen lake. Monroe's men dove for cover, returning fire in bursts that lit up the tree line in orange flashes. The old hunting lodge became a battlefield, smoke and snow mixing in the chaos. Ben didn't flinch. He moved with purpose, pistol in one hand, the other gripping Ellie's arm as he led her toward the tunnel entrance behind the lodge. Shadow stayed close, growling low, her body tense and ready. "We stick to the wall," Ben whispered to Ellie. "Eyes forward. Don't stop." Ellie nodded. She was trembling, but not with fear. She was ready. She had Anna's scarf around her neck and something deeper in her chest now. Resolve. As Zeke's rifle barked again, Ben opened the hidden trapdoor in the pantry and ushered Ellie down the narrow steps. The air inside was damp, earthy, thick with the smell of old wood and thyme. Shadow went first, her paws silent on the stone. Ben followed, closing the hatch behind him. The tunnel sloped downward, curving toward the back of the ridge, a hidden exit route Zeke had carved years ago. They moved fast, each step echoing in the tight space. Behind them, the gunfire grew louder, closer. "Zeke won't hold forever," Ben said. "He's buying us time," Ellie replied, her voice stronger than he expected. They emerged from the tunnel into the edge of the forest, a half-mile from the lodge. Snow still covered the ground, though the morning sun had begun to peek through the branches, turning the frost into light. Ben checked the signal on the sat phone Zeke had given him. 1 bar. Enough. He hit the emergency beacon. The world would know where they were soon enough. "Let's keep moving," he said. But Shadow froze. She stood still, nose in the air, then slowly turned back, toward the lodge. Ben followed her gaze. Smoke. Distant, curling into the sky like a signal, and then a sound. Not gunfire, a howl, not one of pain, of warning. Shadow bolted. "Shadow!" Ben shouted, but she was gone. "No!" Ellie cried, running after her. Ben cursed under his breath and followed, snow flying beneath their feet as they crashed through the woods. Shadow led them in a wide arc back toward the ridge, but not to the lodge, to the overlook, the cliffside. Ben broke through the tree line and skidded to a halt. There, Monroe, bloodied, limping, dragging a rifle behind him, alone. Somehow he'd escaped the firefight, and he had seen them. He raised his weapon. Ben dove forward, slamming into Ellie, knocking her to the ground just as the shot rang out. Pain exploded in his shoulder. He cried out, rolling to cover Ellie's body. Another shot. Missed. Then movement. Shadow. She leapt from the rocks above, a blur of fur and muscle. She hit Monroe full force. They crashed into the snow, Monroe screaming, gun clattering away. Ben sat up, blood soaking his jacket, his breath ragged. He watched as Shadow stood over Monroe, teeth bared, a low growl vibrating from her chest. "Call her off!" Monroe gasped. "You think you're better than me?" Ben stood slowly, clutching his shoulder. "I don't need to call her off," he said, voice cold. "She remembers you." Monroe's eyes widened. "Shadow," Ben said softly, "it's over." And just like that, her growl faded. She stepped back, never taking her eyes off Monroe. He lay there, shaking, small. For the first time, he looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd spent his life burying the truth only to be exposed by the one he underestimated. A dog. Ben turned to Ellie. "Are you okay?" She nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Are you?" He smiled weakly. "Let's just say I've had better mornings." Sirens wailed in the distance, real ones this time. Federal agents, local cops. Reporters, probably. The world was coming. Ben sat in the snow and leaned back against a tree, letting the sun hit his face. Shadow came to rest beside him, curling into his side, warm and steady. Ellie leaned her head on his good shoulder. None of them said anything for a long time. It took days to untangle everything. Monroe was taken into custody, wounded, disgraced, exposed. Zeke survived. He walked out of that lodge with one hell of a story and a bullet scar he'd wear like a badge. The footage from Ben's live stream was picked up by every major outlet. The program was real, the memory conditioning, the covert deployments. The dogs used like data banks, trained, programmed, then discarded when they remembered too much. But Shadow survived, the last of her kind, and now the most protected. Ben gave interview after interview, not to be a hero, but to make sure no one could ever bury it again. Ellie started writing. Pages filled with her mother's voice. Her own memories. The truth. They didn't go back to the cabin. Some places were meant to stay haunted. Instead, they moved west to a quiet stretch of land outside Sedona. Open skies. A new start. Shadow grew old there. She still ran like a soldier, still slept beside Ellie's bed every night, but her eyes were softer now, at peace. One evening, Ben sat on the porch, watching the sunset bleed across the sky. Ellie came out, dropped beside him with a warm mug in her hands. "You ever think about what she remembers?" she asked, nodding toward Shadow, who was dozing near the steps. "All the time," Ben said. "And you think it hurts?" Ben thought about that. He looked at the dog who had carried so much, orders, secrets, ghosts, and had somehow still found her way home. "No," he said finally. "I think she remembers what matters." Ellie smiled. Shadow stirred, opened one eye, then rested her head again. Ben watched the last of the sunlight slip beneath the horizon. And for the first time in a long time, he felt free. Some truths are buried because they're dangerous, some because they're inconvenient. But the most important truths, the ones that can save us, change us, redeem us, those are the ones that refuse to stay buried, even if it takes a loyal heart, a broken man, and a memory that won't fade to dig them up again.